Hey, this is my second attempt at this video because I recorded like a 20-minute video answering this question that I didn't select the right mic for, so it got screwed up. Anyway, the question I got asked was, how do you get a job in debate? And so I wanted to kind of break that down in terms of both my own personal experience and what I would actually recommend for people. And I wasn't entirely sure how I wanted to do that, like order wise. Like, are people not going to listen if I tell my story first, or like, should I just give you the details first? But I'm going to try and just basically combine those things into like what my advice is versus what I actually did. So, the number one way to get a job in debate actually sadly comes down to sort of a sub point A and a sub point B. So, number one, the most important thing, the S tier of getting a job in debate. Subpoint A is being good at debate, kind of a prerequisite. So we're going to largely ignore that. And subpoint B is knowing people who can get you jobs in debate. And it's not super fun to hear that if you don't know people who can get you jobs in debate, but almost every single person I know who has a job, whether it's at a private academy or as a community college coach or as a university coach, basically got the job because they knew someone who essentially like had that job or had some kind of connection to help them get that job. When it comes to my own personal experience, I started working as a private coach in Silicon Valley because Sasan was already working for a company that we both worked for an extended period of time out in Fremont. And he was really liking the job. And essentially, I was like, hey, is there any chance? I just graduated college, but I was still competing for a semester because I graduated in December. And I'm like, any way I could apply to the job? And he's like, yeah, 100%, man. I'll set you up with a email and then a conversation with the guy who owned it. And I went through that whole process. He seemed interested. And then basically, I needed to know two things. One, how much I wanted to be paid hourly. And two, how many like prep hours I wanted, right? Like as a teacher, essentially, like you're going to get paid to prepare for the class as well as teaching the class. Not every place has this, but this place did, which I thought was fantastic. And I actually prefer that model to pretty much anything else. I don't really recommend working somewhere where you have to teach the curriculum that they want and where they don't pay you to prepare for the class. Things like that. That's pretty annoying. Anyway, so Sam was like, here's the deal, man. I get 10 hours of prep a week and I get $30 an hour. You should ask for $35 in 12 hours. And when they say no and give you 25 and like 8, just take it. And I'm like, oh, totally, dude. I mean, I make like $12 an hour. I'll take 25 all day. And so I went in and I said, hey, I'd like $35 an hour and I would like 12 hours of prep a week. And they said, done. And so Sasan had basically given me a better job than him, which was great. Appreciate that. Sasan's always been the homie. When I left that place, as far as the private work, the next place I went and worked was because of, once again, sort of a networking thing. I had a friend named Blake, still have a friend named Blake. He's the homie. And shout out Hired Judge. And Blake basically was like, hey, there's this other academy. Would you be interested in talking to them about it? Because I was kind of thinking about leaving the private coaching game. And I was like, okay, I'll check out one last place, see how it is. They were offering even more money. I think I was getting $50 an hour when I was working there. And I tried that out, but they were sort of more curriculum focused of like their own curriculum, which I thought was kind of whack. And there were some benefits, but ultimately I got paid a bunch of money over the summer, and then I just decided that I was going to focus on the professor thing. So number one, sucks to hear it. You need to know someone. Like honestly, you should find out which one of your friends have these jobs, which people in the community have these jobs, and potentially might be willing to get you a connect. If not, it really is as easy as just looking up sort of debate companies in your area and then reaching out to those people. It's not super hard to send an email across to them, and there's no harm to be done from sending out an email that says, hey, my name is this, I'm a competitor or I'm a former competitor, and these are sort of my qualifications. I've attached a resume, and I was just hoping we could talk because I'd be super interested in working for you. If you have an availability at any point, you'll have a conversation with those people, and if you're not a monster, they'll probably give you a chance or something to that effect. So number one is networking. Having people you know matters a whole ton. Now, the person who asked this question didn't just ask about sort of private academies, they asked about jobs in general. And so the next thing comes down to, let's talk about the one I have the least experience with, though I have done this a bit, which is private individual level coaching. And so this is where someone just pays you to sort of one-on-one coach them. Kind of a tutor model, kind of a prep coach model. And I've done this before. I got paid by a team to fly out to the TOC with them and like prep them and do their briefs and stuff in public forum, which is pretty cool. But I actually am not. I not only don't recommend you doing this as a job, I don't recommend other people do that, period. I don't recommend you get a private coach in that sense. I almost never think that it's worth it. I also think, crucially, you definitely don't need it. Like, there are people who are. I don't want to use any specific names, right? But there was a post recently by someone who I think is an incredible debater, very good debater. had conversations with them and whatnot about wanting to be a private coach or offering their private coaching services, but like that person never had a private coach. They did all those things they did without a private coach. And literally everyone I know actually who like won a national championship or anything like that didn't have a private coach. They were just coached by their team, or they worked with their teammates, or they worked with their friends, the people they know. In some cases they were student run programs, but I basically don't know anyone who had a private coach and was tremendously successful. Now, if your goal is just to be a little bit better and you have nothing but money to throw around, that's probably fine, and there are probably people who I'd recommend, including that person. But I think in general, not a great model. And when it comes to getting those jobs, you kind of just have to do the like marketing game, which I don't like. And so you're like posting on Reddit, like, "Hey guys, I'm a private coach. I'm offering blah 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 services." Don't love that. Not a huge fan of it. Blowing past it. So this person also asked, "What does it take to be like a community college coach?" And there's sort of two models here, but in California, at least, as far as I'm aware, every community college is exactly the same. And what I need to communicate here crucially is to be a community college coach, with the exception of like literally Sasan. Shout out to Sasan. You need to be a community college professor. And to be a community college professor, you need your master's degree. So step one in the process of becoming a community college coach is being a successful competitive debater, right? If you're a successful competitive debater at the end of your bachelor's degree, almost certainly you're going to have some opportunities, depending on the universities you're interested in, to be a graduate assistant coach. So I was a graduate assistant coach at Pacific, which is also where I competed. But there were a few places I could have gone and considered going, and for Parley, it's a little bit more limited these days, obviously. But the bottom line is, I went and I got my master's degree in communication education while I was coaching the University of the Pacific speech and debate team. And for that, they gave me a full ride scholarship, so I didn't pay anything for my schooling, and they paid me a stipend. So it wasn't very much, but it was like $12,000, $14,000 a year, which is honestly pretty great in grad school, and especially living in Stockton where things are so cheap. But the bottom line is, if you're not a good competitor and you're not a reasonably good student, it's going to be hard for you to get that GA position, that graduate assistant coach position. And the GA position is 100 million % the most important thing for you, because you're essentially in an apprenticeship, right? Like I got to be coached on how to be a coach by Steve, and Steve had been a coach for a long time and is a successful coach, and I still to this day, I've mentioned this a million times, but I go to Steve all the time for stuff. And so much of how I coach is informed by how Steve coached, and how I run my team now is informed by what Steve taught me. And it was very much this mentorship relationship. But the important thing beyond just learning how to coach and having such a good person to lead me was that I was able to make a lot of connections, right? Because I'm coaching in Northern California, but also on the national circuit, and people are seeing my teams be successful, or they just know me and they're interacting with me, and they know that I'm going to be available as a professor potentially. And so that lets me sort of get my foot in the door a few places. On top of that, it let me get a lot of good professional references from the sort of people who worked at Pacific when I was there, right? The various chairs of the departments, my professor, Steve, of course, was one of my references. And I know for a fact that Steve's reference went a long way, because when they called me to give me the job, they kind of mentioned it directly. At least I think they were talking about Steve. And so you've got to become a graduate student. You've got to get your master's degree. And in California, if you want to coach a team, that's almost certainly going to be a master's degree in communication, which really matters, because different schools, Pacific for instance, if you want to coach the team, you must be a grad student in the communication program. And I think that's also the case at San Diego State. But in places like Western Kentucky, you can get your master's degree in whatever and still coach the team. So sort of depends on where you go. Once you have your master's degree, the next step is that you need to become an adjunct. An adjunct just means part-time professor. And so it's pretty easy to become an adjunct at schools, because one, they just post these things like online, right? The state requires all California community college jobs to be posted online, and so you can just apply to them. But hopefully, during your graduate assistantship, you were talking to schools around you and saying like, "Hey, I'd be interested in coaching you." I had a few schools, two primarily. So for here's the thing, I was going to go to DVC. That what was going to happen. That was the dream. That was what I was always going to do. But I had extensive talks with San Joaquin Delta, right? Because I was also close with people there, because obviously I was coaching at UOP, which is also in Stockton, and a few other schools that I had thought about as like my backup plan if things sort of went sideways. But the bottom line is, all of these people were like, "Hey, well, let's get you in our adjunct pool. Let's see, next time we're looking to fill a public speaking class or something, let's have you do that." And what is very important in grad school, if you are a graduate assistant coach rather than a graduate assistant like TA, is you probably did not learn how to teach. You've just been coaching. And so I really, really focused down postgraduate school on how do I teach as opposed to how do I coach, because this is the most important thing if you're trying to become a community college coach. As far as the president and the vice president and all those people at your college are concerned, you are not a coach first. You are a professor first. They are hiring you to teach public speaking, argumentation and debate, small group communication, interpersonal communication, these kinds of things. And you just happen to also coach debate or coach speech for their speech and debate team. It's easily a number one. So once you've been an adjunct for a while, really it's a waiting game, because schools in the state of California, and I might be exaggerating here, there's like 3, maybe 4 full-time openings for communication professors, period, in the state at like schools that have forensics teams every year. Like maybe. So there's 4 jobs, and to be clear, these are not jobs that make you the coach of the team. These are just full-time communication professor jobs. If we narrow it down to forensic specific ones, it can get even smaller, right? And so you are really waiting until the school that you were interested in has either a full-time communication position or, more specifically, a full-time communication and forensics position. In my case, DVC's position was for the co-director of the team and the director of debate, and I already was the director of debate and everything but like pay scale, essentially. And so I applied for that job. What does that job application process look like? I think that's a pretty interesting question, because no one here in theory has done this. So number one, they are going to post job application, and you'll do your general entry, like here's what my degree is, let me prove my degree, here's my name, blah, 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 blah. But then there will be supplemental questions, right? Where you're essentially writing essays in response to prompts for the job. That goes into what's called paper screening. So paper screening is where people from the department that you're going to be applying for, and I think maybe 1 or 2 people who are not from your department, but are maybe from your division, they look through all the applications and they look through all of the essays, the supplemental questions, and they decide, okay, we are going to do first round interviews with this person, this person, this person, this person. Who knows how many? Could be 10, could be 20, could be 5 if only 5 people apply, right? Now, this also gets scary because there's this thing called a failed search. Now, this doesn't happen all the time, but if not enough people apply for the job, because I think the law says they have to interview 3 or 4, or they have to send 4 to finals or 3 to finals, whatever it might be. Could be 2 to finals. The job goes away. And so no matter how good you were, you don't get it, which could suck. Anyway, they do paper screening, they interview. That first interview is your department, right? So it's professors from your department, and then the dean of that department or that division, and then usually 1 professor who is also from that division but is not in your discipline. So in my case, it was 2 comm professors, the dean of our division, and then a drama professor. And those people just interviewed me, right? And that first interview started with a teaching demo. So I think I had to do a 20-minute, it was a 10 or 20-minute teaching demo. And after that, there was questions. And they ask everyone the same questions, right? They have to as part of the sort of standardized process. And that lasted about an hour. About a month later, they did final interviews. And the final interview is also called the president's interview. And the president's interview is where the president of the college and a few like VP type people interview you. So there's no one from your department. And crucially, and this is super duper important, that second interview very likely has no one who's ever done speech and debate, who has no idea about anything related to speech and debate. And so those questions, they have to actually do sort of same standardized questions, and some of them are about being a professor and about professional development, but obviously a few are about forensics. But like, you have to remember that they don't know what a debate tournament's like or what it's like to be a coach on a debate team. And so you're trying to frame it for that specific audience. And the advice I got, and I was very fortunate because since I knew so many directors of forensics and people who were on hiring committees at different colleges, I was able to hit them up and be like, okay, what should I be doing? What do you like to see from an interviewee? I was also fortunate because at the same time I was going through this process, one of my best friends in speech and debate, Brittany Hubble, who's one of the coaches at El Camino College, now full-time as well, was applying for full-time jobs. And I had told everyone, like, well, how are you worried about applying for the job? And I was like, just Brittany. Like, the only person who I think would get the job over me, essentially, who'd be applying is Brittany if she applied, because Brittany's a legend and has all these accomplishments, and is also a way better professor than me, and like comes up with sick courses. Is just also a much nicer person. And so I was like, as long as Brittany doesn't apply, I'm good. And I figured she wouldn't because she's from SoCal and she wanted to work at El Camino. So me and Brittany are both applying for different jobs, but the same exact job at different colleges, right? And because of that, we were able to like do mock interviews for each other. And on top of that, the director at El Camino, Francesca Bishop, who I also love and is a legend, did a mock interview with me and gave me advice on what I should change in these sort of things. And basically, I got a lot of information about figuring out the sort of DEI stuff, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. What is your college's mission? How do you fit into that broader mission? What are your ambitions beyond just coaching and teaching? Like all of these things. And I went in, did my interview, and a few weeks later, they gave me the job. But the bottom line is, Brittany, who I told you is incredibly qualified, better than me in every single way. Brittany, I'm pretty sure, did like 10 applications over the course of 3 years or something. Got to like 5 president's interviews. And for those like first 5, did not get the job. Despite being overqualified. I told she's better than me. As far as like, I don't even know how someone could hire me over her. I'm glad she didn't apply for my job. I'm glad she got hers. But the bottom line being, this is literally the most qualified person I could possibly imagine applying for this debate job, right? She's coached the like top team at the Community College National Championship in debate a bunch of times. She coached the team that won the 2022 Community College National Championship, and still was getting denied and losing out to other people. And so it's possible you don't get the job. I got lucky. It was one and done for me. I applied to one job exactly. I got the job, and that was great and fortunate. But the bottom line is there's kind of a lot of steps here, right? You have to be a good debater. You have to get into graduate school, specifically one where you're a graduate assistant. You have to be a good coach, and be a good coach that is networking with other people, getting to know people, making other people like you. You have to become an adjunct professor where you're going to make no money. No money. You make no money as an adjunct professor unless you work at like 5 colleges and teach 8 classes like my best friend Angie Morgan does. And so it sucks. Being an adjunct sucks. Being a graduate student sucks. And then eventually, if you're lucky, you become a full-time professor. And so that's how you become a community college coach for the most part, assuming you want a full-time job. And that's how you do the private thing as well. And so bottom line, like, I know this sucks to hear, but essentially, if you're like, what can I actually do? You need to get very good at debate. You need to network. You need to learn how to coach. You need to learn how to teach. Because if you can do those 4 things, you're going to be in a really solid place. You're going to be good in job interviews. And the thing is, once you get one debate job, it's much easier to get the next one, right? Because you'll have worked with a bunch of people, and eventually some of those people will jump ship and go to another debate company. And now you have to connect in at that place, or at a minimum, you can show that, hey, I worked for this company, this is what I did, this is what my salary was, like, et cetera, et cetera. And so I hope that answers the question. Good luck becoming a debate coach, whether that's private or community college or college in general. And have a wonderful New Year's.